Hi, it's Lisa and Harry for another episode of the American Revolution in New Jersey, and this time also in Pennsylvania. So we're standing here at a very important place in the American Revolution. We're at Washington Crossing, Pennsylvania, to talk to you a little bit about that fateful evening of December 25th, 1776. So Washington and his army were in New Jersey, but they crossed over the river to Pennsylvania on December 7th and 8th. Washington to that point had a bit of a reputation about losing battles, and it was a real struggle, and the morale was really low for the ragtag American Revolution Army. Washington and his other generals and captains decided that they were going to mount a surprise attack on a Hessian garrison at a barracks in Trenton. So on December 25th, starting at 4 p.m., they amassed their troops along the banks of the Delaware River to cross over to New Jersey. Harry, do you know how many troops Washington crossed from this spot?
2,400.
Exactly. They crossed 2,400 troops over in the icy cold night, 18 cannons, and 50 to 75 horses. So they started at 4 p.m. here, and they ended up at the Battle of Trenton, what is now known as the Battle of Trenton, by 8 a.m. on December 26th. So if you look behind me, you see that there's these boats that they have here. These are reproduction boats of the types of boats that Washington used to cross the Delaware River. Harry, do you happen to know what those boats are called?
Aren't they called Durham?
They are called Durham boats, and they weren't made specifically for the crossing of the army. They were actually used for iron ore that was transported up and down the Delaware River. So also behind me you can see a cannon carriage, and the cannon that's on there, that's also a reproduction. So if you can imagine putting 18 of these cannons on these boats, 2,400 troops, horses, all kinds of things, the chaos and all of that going on, it must have been a really crazy night. So there's a very famous painting of the crossing of the Delaware River by an artist called Emanuel Leutze. And maybe you're familiar with it, but it shows Washington. He's on the front of the boat. He looks regal. He has troops in the boat with him, including members of the Massachusetts Regiment. Some African-American soldiers are in that painting. Just if you can kind of remember that. We'll show it to you a little bit later in the video. So we're here standing in the little carriage area at Washington's Crossing Park in Pennsylvania, and in a few minutes we're going to take you down to the banks of the Delaware to see how far it is across the river and how Washington actually crossed it.
I'm Jeff, and this is Harry again, and we're at McConkey's Ferry Tavern, which was Washington's headquarters, at least for part of the crossing. There was a similar building on the other side where he spent some time, they say, as well, but this building dates back to the time he was crossing. Harry, you have any questions?
Yeah. Is this an original building?
Well, mostly yes. It was heavily restored over the years, but most of it is the original Ferry Tavern, yes. And we're going to go over and take a better look at the river. Come on, Harry. The river's right over there. And look, Harry. You can see the New Jersey side, right?
Yep.
Yep, that's New Jersey on the other side. There's the river. And the boats were all in this area. They weren't all in one little place. They were spread out for quite a distance. There were quite a lot of boats going back and forth. It wasn't one charge across the river. They were going for a very long time. Why, some people say it was about 12 hours the whole operation took to complete. So they're going back and forth, dropping people off, coming back, dropping people off, coming back. There was also a flatbed ferry. This had been an established ferry point that was used in addition to the ore-carrying Durham boats, so they used both sort of vehicles to get across the river. But it took a long time, and then it was sleet and snow and cold, and they had to go 9 miles down the river to Trenton. That's a long walk, isn't it, Harry?
Yeah.
I think so. Now we're in the city of Trenton. We're at an important spot in the Battle of Trenton. When Washington marched down the 9 miles, he set up cannons right where that monument behind us is, and that is the Trenton Battle Monument. There are two streets on either side of us. In those days they were called King and Queen Streets, and the Hessians were in the town. They were trying to form up. And do you think those cannons gave them a lot of trouble?
Yeah.
Yeah, Harry, they did. Now, this was his first victory in a long time. We were being chased across New Jersey, and why was it important to have at least one victory before the end of the year?
Because then their enlistments would have ended, and they wouldn't have to be in the army.
Right, he would lose his army. He had to convince him to stay for a little longer. If they had a victory, then maybe they would stay in. So it was very important. And Harry, who's that all the way on the top of that monument?
That's George Washington.
Yes, that's George Washington, Harry.
And now, let's take a look at the kind of uniforms these soldiers wore in the American Revolution. Harry's wearing a three-cornered cocked hat, and he's got a regimental from a New Jersey regiment, could be 1st, 2nd, 3rd, or 4th Regiment. In the beginning of the war, and up through past the middle, the New Jersey troops wore blue coats with red facings. Towards the end of the war, they were getting new coats that had tan-colored facings, what they called buff facings. But most of the war, most of the soldiers in the New Jersey regiments wore blue with red. Now, we're going to dress up Harry as a British soldier. So, Harry, if you can take that coat off. And this is British infantry. That's the people who are firing the muskets. And they wore red. Now, not everyone in the British Army wore red. The people who fired the cannons for the British Army, the artillery, actually wore blue coats, so they wouldn't get too dirty from the cannons. But the people who are firing the muskets and in line, those people, those regular regiments, they wore red. And Harry, what regiment is this? Can you read that from the button?
This is the 43rd Regiment.
Because it says 43. So there were a lot of British regiments, and they had them numbered, and they had the numbers on the buttons. And you see that he has a very light color, a kind of off-white facing color. Different regiments might have different color facings. That's what this trim color is called. Now we're going to take this off. You take that off, Harry. And we have one more. This is a Hessian Grenadier in Regiment von Donop. That's a Hessian name of a colonel of the regiment. And they named them after their colonels, the people in charge, at least technically. And that's good enough for now. And stand there, and Harry, you got to take this hat off. And we're going to give you a Hessian mitre cap. And this isn't really a helmet because there's a lot of brass in the front, but it's fabric, it's cloth in the back. So it's not going to help you very much, but it makes you look real tall and maybe a little scary. And you might have a fancy mustache there too, as a Hessian Grenadier. And Grenadier means they threw grenades. That's what it means, at least early on. Probably in the Revolution they weren't throwing grenades, but by that time. Now, we're going to put this on, and this is something everybody would have, maybe not that fancy. The Hessians are very fancy. They were from a German country. Germany was a lot of little countries then, and the Hessians were one place that later became united with all the other German states, but they spoke German, and they were here. Their monarch was the brother-in-law of the King of England, and they were very close allies. Some people call them mercenaries, but they were sent here by their king, and they didn't have much choice in the matter. If you look, you see that he has nice brass there, and he has these things that look like grenades that are flaming bombs. And that's to show he's a grenadier. So, Harry, we have one more thing everybody would have. They would have canteens. And the Hessians mostly had these metal canteens. Some people had wooden ones. And we're going to put this on. And you would have a lot more equipment than this. This is just a start. And that would be pretty tiring running around with that, right?
Yeah.
Now, your shoes might be in better shape being well-equipped Hessians, except the soldiers in Washington's army might have buckle shoes like this if they had shoes at all, but they would be in a lot worse shape than these. And these aren't in great shape, but they would be lucky to even have shoes at all, those soldiers that were marching down to Trenton. So thank you very much, Harry. And that's what the soldiers would be dressed like.
So thank you for watching our video about Washington's crossing and the Battle of Trenton. We hope you enjoyed our little trip on the road. Just so you know, in the future, Washington's Crossing Historical Park does an annual reenactment of Washington Crossing. They do a practice day in early December with a festival that's open to the public, and then they actually cross on Christmas Day. So that's a very popular event that you can maybe attend hopefully in 2021. And we also want to tell you that the Old Barracks Museum, which is here in Trenton, also does an annual reenactment of both the first Battle of Trenton and the second Battle of Trenton. And that usually takes place the first weekend after Christmas. So hopefully in the future you can come to see one of these reenactments on your own. They're really exciting, and you really get the idea of what it was like for the troops here in Trenton fighting the American Revolution. On behalf of the Burlington County Historical Society, Lisa,
Harry.
Jeff.